Hi everyone, it's Terry here. Today I'm going to talk about indie game companies versus big companies, or as some people know them, AAA studios. So what's there to talk about? I have been recently thinking what's the main difference in sense that indie game companies are nowadays performing quite well versus big game companies are not performing so well, but there are some reasons. Of course, you probably have heard already there are reasons or you have your own thoughts, but I just wanted to share my perspective. And it's probably to some extent quite a lot of general information too. So I think the main or the biggest difference indie companies have a lot of freedom because they don't rely on shareholders. They don't rely on any executive decisions and so on. So this kind of things can, first of all, keep away some maybe microtransactions that are to some extent, I guess, forced or pressured by shareholders and so on. And also, to some extent, it gives definitely more freedom if you are a small company because you can kind of experiment a lot more. And I feel like that indie companies are much more passionate about what they are doing because usually they start making something because they want to make it. They have a vision and they want to share their vision with everyone. They want to make it something that everyone can experience. And quite often it can be something that's quite unique. They can do whatever they feel like works in their mind. And to us players, it can give a very unique experience. And also, quite often, those small companies are actually considering our feedback because, of course, they still do want to make it work. They still do want to make profit out of it because obviously every game to create a game it requires some funding, right? It has budget or whatever. And actually this is some biggest difference that big game companies do have is huge budgets. And of course, thanks to these budgets, they can create a lot. They can give us high quality content. Well, they don't always perform so well. They don't always deliver, but I guess to some extent it's because first of all they have big budget, but it quite often comes with responsibilities, as I mentioned, shareholders and so on. So because there are responsibilities, they are afraid to take risks, and because they don't take risks, they quite often just follow whatever used to work, so to say, or whatever has been working over the years so far. And also they do kind of consider different kind of minority groups, and so they do kind of in their mind please everyone, but quite often this makes games to some extent maybe boring because you can't please everyone in the end, and you quite often have to leave quite many things out, or you have to do some things to the games that may make the games worse because they cannot show certain things. I mean, they can, but they choose not to, and so on and so on. So, because of this, I think it is a bit difficult for them to make, I guess, unique enough games because they are not willing to take risks and they just want to kind of continue whatever has been working so far, especially just do some franchises and so on. It is kind of holding them back, in my opinion. And for this reason, quite often they fail. Their game may not be pleasing. And also, I think because they do have to please their shareholders and whoever is, so to say, on the highest position, quite often this kind of people are not even up to date what's going on in the gaming world. What do people really want? They just think about money, money, money. so they kind of pressure their teams to just make game as pay to win as possible, I guess. Also, they pressure their teams to release as quickly as possible, which then leaves games unoptimized and so on, even though the game looks maybe visually great and so on. But yeah, the optimization is not there. And overall, I think it puts a lot of pressure to, so to say, follow that narrow path, as I said, so that the teams are not willing to take any risks because they would have to, of course, probably take responsibility, which they don't want. So this quite often leaves games a bit boring, not innovative enough. And I can totally see why indie companies in that sense have an advantage. But of course, the indie companies quite often struggle because they don't have enough funding. Their teams are small and it takes time to finish the game. So I think that's one of the big reasons why smaller companies, especially, quite often release their games in early access just so that they can slowly make some extra money while developing their game. And at the same time, of course, in return, they promise to listen to players' feedback. In my experience, they don't always listen to it so well, but yeah, I guess to some extent, maybe more than those big game companies. So I think if those indie game companies had enough budget, enough funding, so to say, while having all that freedom they have and all that passion they usually have, the games could be a lot better than what we have available now. There are still some really good games, but lots of games that release are just failures. And I think both fail for different reasons. So those big companies fail just again because they have to follow too many expectations, either financial expectations or when it comes to freedom to do something, or maybe I should say not having a lot of freedom. And why indie companies usually fail is because they don't have enough money, and quite often they don't have enough possibilities to, I guess, do something big enough, something great enough. And quite often this may take away from their motivation, and in many cases, those indie companies, while they would maybe like to do a bit more here and there, but it just becomes too overwhelming, and financially, just they cannot take it. So quite often they release their games with not enough content and somewhat maybe unfinished, or at the same time, many of them don't even actually finish their games. So it seems like both ways there are pros and cons. There are some companies that are somewhere in the middle too, but just too few who can perform quite well because they have enough budget, but also they have enough freedom and so on and so on. Plus, they are pretty good at listening to players. So this kind of thoughts between the two sides, I guess, and something in the middle. I guess not much new, but it's just something I have been thinking about because indie game companies are becoming more and more popular nowadays, and those big game companies are just ruining their reputation here and there. And yes, of course, there are many reasons why it's like this and that, but those reasons are all because of the things I just mentioned, at least mainly. As always, feel free to share your thoughts and opinions. I'm curious to know. And that's it for today. See you. Take care. Bye.